have a new lesson going on here, new unit, and we're going to be looking at factoring. However, this is still going to involve some exponent rules, so you still want to keep those in mind. So what we're going to start off here is factoring out a greatest common factor. Now, you've done this before and you've identified the greatest common factor based out of numbers. So you're going to find the largest factor that multiple numbers share. So like 6, 12, and 36, their greatest common factor would be 6. So when you do that, you'll have a number, but you can also factor out a variable. Now, what we're going to look at here is kind of like what I like to call an undistributing. So when we learned distributing way back at the very beginning of the year, remember we had a number out in front and then we would multiply it out. Now, this is a little bit different. We're going to take a number and pull it out, essentially. So let's look here. We have 15x squared plus 20x plus 35. So what we're going to be looking for here, notice that I have a variable in only two terms. One term, two terms. I don't have an x in this term. So I can't factor out an x, but I can find a number that can go into 15, 20, and 35. So the largest number that could go into all of those is going to be a 5. So essentially, I'm going to undistribute or pull out a 5. Now, remember when we distributed, I would multiply. So essentially what I'm going to do here is basically divide everything by 5. And that's what's going to be left with here. So I'd have 3x squared plus 4x and then plus 7. So you can see here that I just divided, so I pulled this 5 out, and that's where I got this 5 from. I divided out a 5 instead of multiplying. So when I would go to distribute, I would distribute the 5 here, here, and here by multiplying. So to find the greatest common factor and to factor that out, I'm going to do the opposite of multiplying, which is going to divide. So I'd have 5 times 3x squared plus 4x plus 7. Now let's look at the second example here. Notice that I do have an x on every single term. So I have an x here, an x here, and an x here. So I can divide by or pull out an x from each term. Now, after I do that, I also want to look at our coefficients. So I have a 36, a 19, and a 1. So there's no common factor that can go into all three of those that are larger than 1. So I'm just going to divide or pull out an x, which remember is like dividing by an x every time. So I'm going to follow those exponent rules, remember. So this would leave me with 36x squared plus 19x, and then x divided by x is going to be a 1. So I divided by x because x was my greatest common factor, and that's how I found what goes inside that parentheses. All right, so here we'll look at example 3. So example 3 here, I do have, notice that I have an x in every term, at least one x. And then I do have a coefficient, or I do have a number that can go into all three of those numbers. And I think the largest one that we have is going to be a 2. So I'm going to basically undistribute a 2x. So remember, when I undistribute or pull that out, I'm basically dividing everything by that term. And that's what's going to give me the remaining amount. So I'm going to have 3x to the 4th. Remember, you subtract exponents. And then I have plus 7x and then minus 11. And so this would be our factoring by greatest common factor. Now, right now you may not see much of a point in that, but once you get later on into factoring, you will find this very beneficial if you are good at identifying that greatest common factor that you can factor out before you start factoring some more. Okay, so just some final notes. I want to make sure that you want to find the largest number. So like there might be some times that 3 and 6 can both go into your coefficients. However, you would want to use the larger of those two, which would be 6. And then that they're all divisible by, and then you want the smallest power of the variable. So in all of our cases here, the smallest power was 1. And so that's what we divided out. But there could be, the smallest power could be 3 or 4 or 7, just depending on what you're given. So you want the largest number and the smallest power to keep that going for factoring by the greatest common factor there.